Bryan, man. Brad and Bryan, man. Okay. And we're recording too. So,
yeah.
So there you go. So tell us about your book there. You're going to talk about, you're going to, this is your vision of how you wanted it to kind of unravel the next few months. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I started reading on this thing, a few months back. I've read it before when I was in college. Oof. And I picked it back up somewhat recently, so whenever I'm not actively trying to burn through something, like I think I've been reading the Book of the New Sun. It's a really good science fiction book by Gene Wolfe. I'll go back and read on pieces of it. And it's wonderful because it's got these small sections that Russell he himself was a philosopher, and he's a mathematician philosopher, and he wrote about, all these philosophers, throughout history. All the way up to modern times. He died before he kind of was part of the postmodern. I guess he was kind of in that starting area where the postmoderns really started to come in and take over. But so I ended up.
Hold on a second. I got a question. Postmodern, is that like Andy Warhol and that kind of stuff, or
that was a movement that kind of started getting to where art and philosophy became a lot more abstract, like say for instance with philosophy, I know there was this philosopher named Derrida, Jacques Derrida, is that right? I think, but and one of his whole thing was like you had the death of meaning, or there's nothing outside the text. Whenever you try to extract meaning from something, it's really just live like in this kind of this void of meaning, which I'm not an expert in Derrida. In fact, that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to start this club, was so I have an opportunity to look into more philosophers that I could, potentially find interested in. But so the idea there's nothing beyond the text, if I'm getting this right, is you have a text, you have meaning to it, and all the meaning that you have is something that it's like this illusion that we kind of extract out of it. And there's not actual meaning out there in the world. It's just like this illusion of meaning at best. I know that like a lot of his writing really was more focused on text. It didn't seem to me that it came off as philosophy, but more so as like this criticism of philosophy and writing itself. But again, I'm not an expert on him by any means. I like what I've seen from the guy. So the way I pictured a meeting going, right? So we all sit around, maybe in a circle or something. And it's like, okay, this month we went over, say, like Nietzsche. I like Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche's really interesting. And I might say, okay, who read what? That's how we start things off. So everybody should have I've got two ideas: Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, or the philosophy book, which is also wonderful. They're not super dense. You can read everything you need to know about a philosopher in not even 15 minutes. I mean, these things are super short. Bertrand Russell's a little thicker, a little more dense, but we could all read the same passage out of one of these books. And then we go through and I might say, okay, there's you, me, and there's person X, Y, and Z, right? And let's say, for instance, person X is like, well, I went ahead and read Beyond Good and Evil, and Y is like, yeah, I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So we can all sit around and talk. Well, I'm like, me and you, we only read, the Bertrand Russell version. So we can take part in the conversation, ask questions, but these guys are the ones that really have the dense what's going on. Maybe we come across a philosopher every now and then where everybody reads extra stuff, or maybe there's one that, well, we all just don't get super in depth to it, but we all have a basic enough knowledge of the philosopher and their ideas where we can hold a conversation about it and maybe learn something. So we're learning from each other, we're learning things ourselves. For me, I like the idea of having, I don't want to use the word obligation because that doesn't sound very. Obligation is not the right word for it, but I have a motivation, that's the word for it, to go and spend time learning. Because these things aren't very long. I think the Aristotle one's the only one I'm really concerned about. Bertrand Russell, because I'm pretty sure it's pretty long. Aristotle, there's a lot to Aristotle. So it's things like that I think could be a lot of fun. So so far we've had quite a few people pop up and mention being interested. So I think we're up to like 6 people now. And it just depends if they show up or not. If it winds up being just me and you having a weekly or a monthly conversation about this, I'm cool with that too. So, yeah.
I think we could probably supplement and do both. I like the personal touch, but also with these intense online meetings, like with Schopenhauer, I think it is Schopenhauer. I can listen to this guy every day. I mean, he is my kind of guy.
Yeah.
You
I
know.
like show.
Yes, he looks cool too, man.
Dude, his stuff is so hard to read, though. I've read. I got that book for Christmas about 4 or 5 years ago, and I started on it.
So you're into this, man. You got them everywhere. So now, have you have you started formulating your version of the world? I mean, what is your? Are you in a matrix here? What is your philosophy? Where are you at in this world? Can you even put it into words? And like, I know that words are put in words. You know,
I can. It's not easy, but I can. I try to keep it. So because I'm a teacher, I try to keep things. So I always say. So I'm gonna tell you what I tell my kids a little bit into it. Okay. So I always tell my students. You know, because a lot of kids come and ask me, you know, Mr. Clark, do you believe in God? Mr. Clark, are you a religious person? What church do you go to? Things like that. And I don't give an answer. Understand that. So with my kids, what I always tell them is I've been on this journey for, you know, decades. I've been working on this for a very long time. I've been spending a lot of my time, you know, throughout the years studying this stuff, learning about it. I've read science, philosophy, literature, things on just like the mysteries of language, you know, trying to look into things like, you know, how space operates, quantum mechanics, black holes. It's all fascinating. The world is such an interesting place. You can just dive into it and never come up for air, you know. And for me to try to impart this, you know, and I'm not saying I'm a master of this stuff, but the stuff that I've accumulated is stuff that I've accumulated. I'm not expecting anybody to understand it. You know, I can't understand half these philosophers I read about. I understand like some of the ideas they convey to me, and I hope that I'm interpreting them. I hope I'm getting that representation properly. I'm probably not for a lot of them, but I do the best I can. But to impart that upon a young person that's 14, 16, even 20, 25, you know, it's a really hard thing to do because their journey is still moving along. They have so much more they have to learn. I'm an authority figure. If I come along and they're like, well, Mr. Clark thinks that, then they might be more inclined to think something that they have a premature understanding of, you know, and then think about the kind of damage that could do.
Well,
you know, you have
this. Okay. I try to tell my kids this, and whether they can hear it, I don't know or not, but everything, you know, is to me, there's everything is this, a big sphere. And everything you know about it is just drilling one little hole in it. There's still all the rest of that there. You know, so there's no way you can understand it. You only see it from just what your eyes can see, sequentially learning about it. And you said something else about driving a stake in the ground. I studied Alan Watts for years. That's where I spent most of my time.
Alan Watts.
With
that Alan Watts tattoo. So.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
cool. You've mentioned all the stuff quantum that you could spend forever thinking about that. But he mentioned this one thing about driving that stake in the ground. He said it's not that, man, and I'm glad you gave the answer you gave, because that's exactly where I am. I kind of float along. It's not a driving a stake in the ground. It's not a rock to hold on to. It's water to float on, because it's always changing. The scenery is always changing. I don't know. Sometimes I do think I'm in a simulation. I really do believe that. And sometimes, you know, I feel sentimental, and I may feel a little bit of something else, you know. But with religion, it's hard to describe, because I'm not. I'm like you on that. It's hard. It would be hard for me to tell, because it's a journey. You know, I'm at one place in it now. If you don't go through all the other places, you can't understand that right there, what I tell you. So I love what you said. That's big, mucho brain.